What if I told you that one of history's most notorious serial killers, a woman who murdered 35 people and kept their bodies in zinc-lined coffins in her basement, never existed at all? What if the real horror isn't the murders she committed, but the fact that someone created her from thin air and fooled the world for nearly a century? Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I read every single one. In the shadows of history, some stories refuse to die. Some mysteries become more terrifying than any truth could ever be. This is the story of a woman who may never have existed, yet her legend has haunted true crime enthusiasts for nearly a century. Tonight, we delve into one of the most chilling cases in criminal history, not because of the murders committed, but because of the horrifying possibility that none of it ever happened. The human mind craves darkness. We seek out stories that make our skin crawl, that keep us awake at night, that remind us that evil lurks in the most unexpected places. But what happens when that craving becomes so powerful that we stop questioning what we're consuming? What happens when fiction becomes fact simply because enough people believe it should be true? The case of Vera Renzi challenges everything we think we know about truth, media, and the stories we tell ourselves about the nature of evil. May 1925. The world was still recovering from the Great War, trying to make sense of unprecedented violence and loss. Into this atmosphere of uncertainty and fear came a story that would capture imaginations and fuel nightmares for generations to come. A shocking headline appears in the Danville Bee newspaper: "Woman held for killing 35 persons." The story spreads like wildfire across American newspapers, each publication adding its own sensational spin to the HA's horrifying tale. "Another Lucretia Borgia found," screams another headline, invoking the name of history's most infamous poisoner. The story painted a picture of evil so complete, so methodical, that it seemed almost too terrible to be true. Yet newspapers across the country picked up the story, each one treating it as verified fact, each one adding to the growing legend of Romania's most dangerous woman. Meet Vera Renzi, the so-called chatelaine of Berkeracul. Beautiful as a picture, they said. A Romanian socialite with dark, mesmerizing eyes and an even darker secret hidden beneath her elegant exterior. The newspapers described her as a woman of refinement and culture, someone who moved in the highest circles of society, someone who would never be suspected of harboring such monstrous intentions. By 1925, authorities claimed she had murdered 35 people with methodical precision. 2 husbands who had disappointed her, 32 lovers who had betrayed her trust, and most shocking of all, her own 10-year-old son. The boy, they said, had discovered her terrible secret and threatened to expose her to the authorities. Rather than face justice, Vera had chosen to silence him forever, proving that no bond, not even motherhood, could overcome her murderous nature. But Vera's true horror lay not in the killing itself, but in what she did with the bodies afterward. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of madness. This was something far more calculated, far more disturbing. Something that suggested a mind so twisted, so removed from human empathy, that it defied comprehension. Police discovered her macabre collection in the basement of her estate, a discovery so shocking that even hardened investigators struggled to process what they were seeing. 35 zinc-lined containers arranged in neat rows, each one a tomb, each one containing the remains of someone who had once trusted Vera Renzi with their heart, their secrets, their very lives. But these weren't ordinary graves hastily dug to hide evidence of violent crimes. No, Vera had turned death into an art form, a twisted gallery of her conquests, displayed with the same care that others might reserve for their most precious possessions. Each container was perfectly preserved, professionally sealed, and most disturbing of all, labeled with meticulous attention to detail. She had created a museum of murder, a private collection that only she could visit and admire. On each container was a nameplate with the victim's name engraved in elegant script, the date of their death marked with ceremonial precision, and most chilling of all, how long they had been her lover. Some containers bore notations of brief encounters measured in weeks or months. Others documented relationships that had lasted years before ending in death. It was a twisted memorial to her jealousy and rage, a permanent record of every betrayal, every disappointment, every moment when love had curdled into something murderous. The basement itself had been transformed into something resembling a mausoleum, with careful attention paid to temperature, humidity, and preservation. This wasn't the work of someone who killed in the heat of passion and then panicked about disposal. This was the work of someone who had planned every detail, who had prepared for this outcome from the very beginning of each relationship. When authorities asked why she committed these heinous acts, Vera's response was delivered with the same cold precision that had characterized her crimes. Her words, as reported in newspapers around the world, revealed a mind utterly divorced from normal human emotion. Out of jealousy, I know that tomorrow they would run after another woman. So I said to myself, they had better sleep quietly in my cellar without having to excite themselves. The casual nature of her confession was perhaps more chilling than the crimes themselves. She spoke of murder as if discussing the weather, of preservation as if describing a hobby, of betrayal as if it were an inevitable fact of life that justified her actions. Vera Renzi was sentenced to life in prison, branded as possibly the most prolific female serial killer of the 20th century. The case was closed, justice was served, and the world could sleep soundly, knowing that this monster had been caged forever. Case closed, or was it? Decades passed, and the world moved on to new horrors, new scandals, new monsters to fear and study. But the story of Vera Renzi refused to die. Instead, it grew stronger with each retelling, spreading across books, documentaries, websites, and even Wikipedia entries. She became a fixture in true crime anthologies, a go-to example of female serial killers who defied stereotypes and expectations. Her story was cited in academic papers, referenced in criminal psychology textbooks, and shared countless times across social media platforms. But in the digital age, something sinister was discovered, something that made the original murders pale in comparison to the truth that was slowly emerging. Modern researchers, armed with sophisticated search tools and access to digitized records from around the world, began digging deeper into the story that had captivated generations of true crime enthusiasts. They searched for birth records in Romanian archives, court documents that would detail her trial, prison records that would track her incarceration, death certificates that would mark her passing. They contacted historians, librarians, genealogists, and government officials. They examined newspaper archives, police reports, and institutional records. They left no stone unturned in their quest to verify the existence of Romania's most notorious killer. What they found was nothing, absolutely nothing. Not a single official document, not one verified record, not even a footnote in local historical accounts that would confirm that Vera Renzi had ever drawn breath. For a woman whose crimes had supposedly shocked an entire nation, whose trial would have been front-page news for months, whose imprisonment would have required extensive documentation, there was no trace of her existence in any official capacity. No arrest records documented her apprehension. No trial transcripts preserved the proceedings that would have determined her fate. No prison documentation tracked her incarceration, her behavior, her eventual death behind bars. No death certificate marked her passing. No burial record indicated where her body might rest. For a woman supposedly sentenced to life imprisonment for the most heinous crimes imaginable, Vera Renzi had vanished from every official record as completely as her victims had supposedly vanished from their lives. The absence of documentation was so complete, so thorough, that it began to suggest something far more disturbing than simple bureaucratic oversight or lost records. It suggested the possibility that there had never been any records to lose in the first place, because there had never been a Vera Renzi to document at all. But wait, skeptics argued, there were photographs, dozens of them scattered across books, websites, and historical archives, all showing the same elegant woman with piercing eyes and aristocratic features. If Vera Renzi never existed, who was staring back from those haunting images that had accompanied her story for decades? Surely these photographs proved that she had been real, that she had lived and breathed and committed the crimes attributed to her name. The truth, when it finally emerged, was more disturbing than any fictional horror story ever written. The womb, and in every single Vera Renzi photograph, was actually Vera Fyodorovna Komissarzhevskaya, a famous Russian stage actress who had died in 1910, 15 years before the murders supposedly took place. She had been one of the most celebrated performers of her generation, known for her dramatic intensity and captivating stage presence. Someone, somewhere, at some point in time, had made a deliberate choice to steal the identity of a dead woman and attach it to a story of unprecedented evil. They had carefully selected a deceased actress, someone famous enough that professional photographs existed and could be easily obtained, but not so internationally renowned that everyone would immediately recognize her face. It was the perfect identity theft from beyond the grave, a calculated deception that had fooled the world for nearly a century. The selection process itself revealed a sophisticated understanding of how legends are created and spread. The photographs showed a woman who looked exactly like what people expected a serial killer to look like. Someone whose beauty masked inner darkness, whose elegant exterior concealed monstrous intentions. The images perfectly matched the psychological profile that the story demanded, reinforcing every detail of the narrative with visual evidence that seemed unshakable. But now that the truth was known, every photograph became evidence not of Vera Renzi's existence, but of an elaborate hoax perpetrated by unknown hands for unknown reasons. Someone had crafted this deception with meticulous care, understanding exactly how to manipulate public perception and create a legend that would endure for generations. The question was no longer whether Vera Renzi had committed these crimes. The question was who had created her and why they had chosen to populate our nightmares with a woman who had never existed at all. The original story, the one that had started this entire legend, appears to have been written by O.B. Taliskas, a Universal Service correspondent working in the chaotic landscape of 1920s journalism. Some researchers believe this may have been Otto David Tolitius, who would later become a Pulitzer Prize winner for his reporting on Nazi Germany and one of the most respected foreign correspondents of his generation. But even this connection dissolves under careful scrutiny, leaving more questions than answers. If such a distinguished journalist had fabricated this story, why would he risk his reputation and career on an elaborate hoax? What possible motive could he have had for creating a fictional serial killer and presenting her as fact? If he hadn't fabricated it, then where did this elaborate tale of murder and preservation come from? Who had enough knowledge of criminal psychology, forensic science, and Romanian culture to craft such a convincing narrative? The story itself demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how serial killers operate, how evidence is preserved, and how investigations are conducted. It included details about zinc-lined containers that wouldn't become common knowledge until decades later, psychological insights that predated the development of criminal profiling, and cultural references that suggested intimate familiarity with Romanian society and customs. Perhaps most troubling of all, when modern researchers contacted experts who should have known about such a significant case, they found only blank stares and confused silence. A professor of Balkan history at the University of London, specifically contacted about the case, admitted he had never heard of Vera Renzi despite her supposed notoriety. In a region where such a massive scandal would have been recorded extensively in historical accounts, where such crimes would have influenced law enforcement practices and social policies, there existed only silence. The absence of academic knowledge was perhaps even more damning than the absence of official records. Historians study the most obscure details of their regions and time periods. Criminal psychologists research every documented case of serial murder. Legal scholars examine precedent-setting trials and their outcomes. Yet none of them had ever encountered any reference to what should have been one of the most significant criminal cases in Romanian history. This suggested not just the absence of records, but the absence of impact. Vera Renzi's supposed crimes had left no ripple effects, No changes in police procedure, no influence on subsequent investigations, no mark on the collective memory of the region where they supposedly occurred. It was as if the entire story had been dropped into history from some other dimension, complete and self-contained, without any connection to the real world it claimed to inhabit. So what is more terrifying? A woman who killed 35 people and preserved their bodies in her basement like trophies in some macabre collection, or the possibility that someone created this entire nightmare from nothing, that for nearly a century we've been haunted by a ghost who was never alive to begin with, that our collective fascination with evil has made us willing participants in a deception so elaborate that we never thought to question its fundamental premise. The story of Vera Renzi forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about ourselves and the society we've created. In our hunger for horror, for stories that chill us to the bone and make us feel alive through fear, how easily do we accept fiction as fact? How readily do we embrace narratives that confirm our darkest suspicions about human nature, regardless of whether those narratives have any basis in reality? Consider how many times this story has been retold, how many books have included it as fact, how many websites have spread it as truth, how many people have shared it with friends and family as an example of real-world evil. Consider how the absence of skepticism, the failure to demand evidence, the willingness to believe in monsters has allowed this phantom to persist and thrive in our collective consciousness. How many other true crime stories are nothing more than elaborate phantoms, created by unknown hands for unknown purposes? How many other cases that we cite as evidence of human depravity are actually evidence of human gullibility? How many other monsters that we use to frighten ourselves and others are nothing more than shadows cast by lies that we've chosen to believe? Vera Renzi may never have existed. Her victims may never have died. Her basement of horrors may never have contained anything more sinister than old furniture and forgotten memories. But the questions she raises about truth, media, and our fascination with evil are very real indeed. They challenge us to examine not just the stories we tell about monsters, but the reasons we need those stories to be true. Some mysteries are solved by finding answers, by uncovering evidence, by following trails of documentation until truth emerges from shadow. Others become more mysterious the deeper you dig, more troubling the more you learn, more disturbing the closer you come to understanding their true nature. In the case of Vera Renzi, the greatest horror isn't what she did to her victims. The greatest horror isn't even the methodical way she preserved their bodies, or the cold calculation she displayed in her confession. The greatest horror is that she never did anything at all, because she never existed to do it. And that means someone, somewhere, created her for reasons we may never understand. But Vera Renzi is not alone in the shadows of fabricated history. There are other phantoms lurking in the archives of true crime, other legends that may be nothing more than elaborate deceptions waiting to be exposed, stories that have shaped our understanding of evil, influenced our fears, and guided our perceptions of what humans are capable of doing to one another. How many more fictional monsters have we accepted as real? How many other cases that we reference as fact are actually nothing more than carefully crafted lies? Consider how many times this story has been retold. How many books have included it as fact? How many websites have spread it as truth? How many people have shared it with friends and family as an example of real-world evil? Consider how the absence of skepticism, the failure to demand evidence, the willingness to believe in monsters has allowed this phantom to persist and thrive in our collective consciousness. How many other true crime stories are nothing more than elaborate phantoms created by unknown hands for unknown purposes? How many other cases that we cite as evidence of human depravity are actually evidence of human gullibility? How many other monsters that we use to frighten ourselves and others are nothing more than shadows cast by lies that we've chosen to believe? Vera Renzi may never have existed. Her victims may never have died. Her basement of horrors may never have contained anything more sinister than old furniture and forgotten memories. But the questions she raises about truth, media, and our fascination with evil are very real indeed. They challenge us to examine not just the stories we tell about monsters, but the reasons we need those stories to be true. Some mysteries are solved by finding answers, by uncovering evidence, by following trails of documentation until truth emerges from shadow. Others become more mysterious the deeper you dig, more troubling the more you learn, more disturbing the closer you come to understanding their true nature. In the case of Vera Renzi, the greatest horror isn't what she did to her victims. The greatest horror isn't even the methodical way she preserved their bodies or the cold calculation she displayed in her confession. The greatest horror is that she never did anything at all, because she never existed to do it. And that means someone, somewhere, created her for reasons we may never understand. But Vera Renzi is not alone in the shadows of fabricated history. There are other phantoms lurking in the archives of true crime, other legends that may be nothing more than elaborate deceptions waiting to be exposed. Stories that have shaped our understanding of evil, influenced our fears, and guided our perceptions of what humans are capable of doing to one another. How many more fictional monsters have we accepted as real? How many other cases that we reference as fact are actually nothing more than carefully crafted lies? The rabbit hole goes deeper than you might imagine, and the questions raised by cases like Vera Renzi's are just the beginning of a much larger investigation into the nature of truth itself. Keep watching The Witness Archives as we continue to uncover these hidden deceptions, explore these phantom cases, and challenge everything you thought you knew about the stories that haunt our collective nightmares. Because sometimes the most important truth isn't what happened, but what never happened at all.